Hey friends, family, followers, I'm Justin Zimmerman here with, I would say, an exclusive first-time podcast interview that's based on the fun, amazing way the world works today. We're going to be talking about team, productivity, scaling, getting your business going and growing no matter what size you are. And these are the things I think about, talk about, read about, leadership and management, all the tools and approaches and philosophies, all that bunch of stuff that seems like it all kind of mixes together in a way that unless you sit down and have a real clear conversation with people who really understand it, or if you are one of those people, you understand what it's like to talk to people who do understand it. It's hard to get through that stuff. And so I made a tweet a couple of weeks ago, just was on a little bit of a detox from dopamine, no screens, no caffeine, and was out in the forest. And I was thinking about what's the difference between an approach? What's the difference between a methodology? What's the difference between a framework? And I put that out there and, well, someone was listening. Someone was actually listening. And so Steve Tendon, who is the founder, co-founder, creator of TameFlow, an Agile, we'll call it an approach until we maybe discuss it later and maybe we change it. I don't know. Maybe we'll break it down another way. Who has spent years, if not decades, working in the Agile mindset, was there from the beginning when all the books, all the things were created on this. And so I had the fortunate pleasure of connecting with him a couple of days ago before this call to set this up for you, to go through a couple of key things, which is like, who is Steve? And why should you care about who he is and what he's done? Something that he'll talk about is how he turned around an 8,000 person division to a new level of performance. What is TameFlow and what are the 4 flows, which is pretty cool. I love that. What does every high performance team need to know? Who should consider TameFlow? Who is it for? Who is it not for? Is it for you? And then we're going to compare and contrast some of the other Agile methodologies with or approaches or frameworks with TameFlow. And finally, we're going to get to the age-old debate around what is the difference between a methodology, an approach, and framework. And so through all of this, whether you're an Agile practitioner or just a business owner who's trying to figure out a better way to motivate their team, motivate their employees to get better results and happiness, and we're going to talk about that out of everyone, that's going to be the basis of our time today. And so with all that said, Steve, fantastic to have you all the way from Malta. I think you're about 8,000 miles away right now, which is kind of cool.
Well, thank you, Justin, for this amazing introduction. And yes, I'm based on the tiny island state of Malta in the middle of the Mediterranean, between the southern tip of Sicily and Africa. So yes, technology is amazing. I saw your tweet and I didn't agree with it. So I said, no, it's not like this. So no, and we started to have that little exchange. And it was just wonderful how you responded. And then, what do I know next? I'm invited to this podcast. So you want to know something about me, I guess.
Yeah.
Well, I've had a career that is divided into 3 parts, or maybe 1 part and 2 other concurrent ones. Originally in the previous millennium, which is like the stone age of information technology, I was a software engineer and I was actually coding. Later, my interest turned into management consulting. I went through several processes with mergers and acquisitions, and we might say a few things about that. And even later, like 4 years ago, I became deeply involved with blockchain technologies and have become an expert on that as well. And I have advised the government on Malta on their blockchain strategy. And now I'm working also with the Republic of the Marshall Islands on some really exciting projects there. Anyway, the first part, the software engineer, that's a fundamental phase of my career and like the foundation for what was to become TameFlow. I had the fortune to work with a company, Borland International. At that time, it was competing head-to-head with Microsoft in the personal computing software business. And Borland was one of the most productive software engineering organization ever. It was a small company compared to Microsoft, it was like 3,000 people, and Microsoft was probably 20, 25,000. But the products that Borland produced were outstanding in all possible ways, not only in terms of features, capabilities, and performance of the product, but in the way they were coded, developed, co-created by the teams.
Mm.
Now, this had a very huge impact on me, not when I was there, because for me it was like the first job. It was learning the ropes, and I took stuff for granted. But then when I left Borland, I saw that all other places were so sluggish and slow, and it was not the same thing. And I wanted to know why. Now, it just so happened that at that time, while I was at Borland, a gentleman by the name of Jim Coplin was working for AT&T, and he was tasked to study several software organizations around the globe. AT&T was producing lots of software, so they wanted to know how to be productive in software development. And he studied many, many companies, and no matter how he sliced and diced the data, Borland was always an outlier on the charts, so something exceptional. He documented this in a paper, and this paper was also a source of inspiration for Jeff Sutherland, the creator of SCRUM. And there are certain parts of SCRUM that are directly inspired from what Jim Coplin described in that paper. Well,
if someone wanted to go look up that paper, where could they go find it? Do you know the name of that?
Yes. I maybe will tell you, and you'll put it in the show notes afterwards.
Sure.
But basically, it was something like Borland Software Craftsmanship by Jim Coplin, 1993 or 94, probably. So long time ago. But anyway, Jim continued his studies, and then he started documenting his findings in a more organized way by writing a book. And the novelty of that book was the approach. He took a patterns-based approach. Patterns come from they have a long history, but in particular, the patterns that Coplin was inspired by were the architectural patterns of Christopher Alexander. And he repurposed the notion of patterns to describe like organizational designs, things that happen inside the organizations, the patterns of communication and interaction between people. And that was the basis for describing how these knowledge work intensive businesses were working one better than the other. And I picked up on that, and I've used patterns ever since. And eventually that became the core of my TameFlow approach. In my career, I then left the software engineering field, and I was tasked with more management responsibilities. And at a certain point, I had to take care of the due diligence of software companies in merger and acquisition operations. So it was exactly the problem that Coplin had faced. Now, how can I judge if a software organization is good or not, and how good is it? And then when the merger had happened, and you had like broken the two eggs and made one omelette, how do you make the two cultures, the two spirits work well together? So all that human dimension of resolving conflicts and getting organizational, what I call unity of purpose and communities of trust, how do you develop that? That became also a centerpiece of my work. And as time progressed, I was very successful on the field using my ideas. But at a certain point, I was asked, how do you do this? And I didn't have an answer. So around 2010, 11, I decided to write down my ideas, primarily to clarify to myself how I was working. And that resulted in the first book that I published with Wolfram Müller in 2013. Hyperproductive knowledge work. It was a funny book to write because it was just a collection of my thoughts. But that's when TameFlow started to have a real identity, and I coined the phrase "tame the flow," and used that extensively in my blogs and everywhere. And 2 years later, 1 year, 2014-15, I established this company of mine, which is called TameFlow, and the idea was to teach the world about my findings. And then eventually in 2016, I had this detour in the world of blockchain technologies, which was connected with what I was doing, because when you're looking into high-performing organizations, one element is to consider the emerging technologies and what impact they can have on productivity, or if they are entirely game changers, so that certain professions or industries might even disappear. So in this scouting activity for emerging technologies, I came across the blockchain, and that took a lot of my attention. I used my TameFlow concepts in considering the impacts of blockchains. I did this 4 years of work with the government here of Malta, and now I'm still deeply involved with blockchain, but now I have gone back to TameFlow. In fact, in February, I published the second book, which is called Tame Your Workflow. And now I am more seriously determined to let the world know about this approach of mine.
And that brings us together here, because kind of trying to think of a good movie analogy where the hero goes missing for a couple of years or decades and then reemerges after a period of time to help save the world in some certain way. And as you were talking, I was thinking about, and I don't know why this person comes to mind. I have a friend named Mauricio Garcia. He's a property manager in Florida, high school friend. And I'm trying to imagine the questions he would be asking about, well, how does this relate to me? What is the fundamental, or what are the fundamental units of value in business? And what do people really care about? And maybe I could spend a little time dancing around that and then jumping into some of the answers I know you have, which is, I think people in their day-to-day lives, small business owners, they care about profits and staying in business and making money. And then next, I think maybe they care about their employees or their own happiness and health. And then maybe there's a third element, which is how smooth does the work and the flow of the business actually feel? And, in your experience, you've got the 4 flows of TameFlow. And so maybe you could use some of those right now to explain to people watching and listening where to focus on to diagnose the pain points and problems to achieve more happiness, to achieve more profits, to achieve more team cohesiveness. Like you said, whether you're 2 giant entities trying to come together as one, or 2 individuals trying to come together as one, it's kind of the same, right? Psychological dynamics are same, the psychology flow, as you were telling me before. And so maybe we could play with a little bit of a case study there for kind of a small business owner trying to achieve next level results. What would you consult them on? And what flows would you pick?
So, the flows are really important and at the core. But I also like to highlight that I've picked up some ideas from other authors and places, and you mentioned profit, and that's one of the elements. In fact, I also talk about the 7 P's of TameFlow, which are purpose, planet, people, performance, profit, passion, and priorities. When it comes to any organization, whether it is a team of 2 or a team of 20,000 or 400,000, the unifying element is having a shared purpose. I think that is the key. The thing that makes a collection of people outperform whomever they are competing with is that they are strongly driven by a sense of purpose. So the unity of purpose is one of the primary elements I am working with. Now, there might be different ways you bring about unity of purpose depending on if you're in that small team of 2 people, if you're in a group of maybe a dozen or 20 people, and if you are an organizational unit of tens or hundreds of people. So I strive to figure out how can I unify, so to say, these different approaches. Because you see, Agile is typically a team-based approach. Scrum was born to manage teams, and as of today, it's still very team-focused. But Agile brought about many good things. So the natural evolution was, let's bring these good things that we discovered at the team level up to the organization level. And that's why we have all these intents of scaling Agile, of making it appropriate and fit to manage a larger situation than the team. Unfortunately, it does not work, because what happens at the organization level, the patterns that are at work at the organization level are not the same as those that are at work when you're at arm's length with someone across the desk and you can shout or throw something at that person to get their attention. The mechanisms are completely different. So how can you find a unifying element, or several elements that go in the same direction? So there you start to sense where this is heading towards. Going in a direction means that there is some element that is moving, elements that are moving, that are in flow, that are not static or not standing still. In fact, we are in constant motion. No, just try it. Don't think about anything, and it's impossible. Your mind is in movement, and that movement of thought will produce many other movements. So in this acknowledgement that things are always moving, well, what can we do to make them move in the same direction? So let's start to break down what are the things that are moving in an organization. Well, there are many, many things. Now, one of the P's is priorities. So we must decide what are the things that are important. Of course, from a corporate perspective, the profit, as you mentioned, one of the other P's, is of primary importance. If you don't make money, well, you won't be around tomorrow. You won't be able to pay your suppliers. You won't be able to pay your employees, and you have to shut down. So you must make money today and in the future. So the flow of money, the financial flow, is absolutely fundamental. But then what else do we have? Well, we have people that communicate and interact. Why? Because they have to make decisions. So they are exchanging information. The flow of information is also extremely important. And the organization that is able to tighten the feedback loops, make them smaller and more operating at higher frequencies, will have an advantage. And then, of course, all companies are doing stuff, even companies that are providing services, invisible stuff. It still is stuff. So it's the movement of stuff through the organization. In knowledge work, it is the successive refinement of ideas that eventually result in some tangible benefit for a client who will pay for that. Even if you don't see it, it's like my idea going from my mind to your mind, and you're adding your ideas, and this process goes on and on. You see it very clearly in software engineering, where you have elements of analysis, of design, of coding, of testing, of quality assurance, and so on and so forth. There's almost nothing that you can touch because it's only material, but you still see that things are moving through. And then there is the last flow. You mentioned happiness. A company with happy people will outperform one with grumpy people. So it's the flow, the psychological flow states, the ability to be in a mind state that allows you to focus on difficult tasks without effort, and having those tasks flowing through your day, and at the end you say, wow, the day is already gone. Where did it go? It's that state of intense concentration that is extremely productive. And as the psychologist, his name is Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi, said, uh, it's when you are in those flow states that you experience happiness. So you see, you are literally, what is the proverb? Hitting up two birds with a stone, right? Because you are increasing your performance, and at the same time you make the people happy. Now, in the psychology flow, there are many other elements, but this is maybe the one that most people can relate to. And of course, all these flows are then interconnected, and what you do in one might affect heavily what you're doing in the others. So there are many like synergic effects of trying to align these flows. And when the four flows are aligned, well, that's when I say that the state of hyper performance kicks in. What is hyper performance? Well, going back to the story of Borland, um, it's been documented that one Borland software engineer was 50, that's not 5, but 50 times as productive as a Microsoft engineer. And I don't think Microsoft didn't know how to write software. So there are really huge gains to be found when you focus on aligning these four flows.
Yeah, that was really great. The second time hearing this, I'm even more tuned in. And you say software engineers, and I'm in the world of software. You're in the world of software. Probably a lot of the people watching this are in the world of software, but there's also like my friend Mauricio, who's not in the world of software. And so, or people like him. And I think just to kind of give a quick breakdown of that, which is if you focus on the flows, it doesn't matter what business you're in, right?
Absolutely.
And how do you know which one to focus on first? If you're a small company with limited resources, how do you diagnose which is the most important one to focus on first? Is that even like the right question? Can you do multiple ones? But I'm just saying, keep it simple. And if we could start with one, what would you choose and how would you choose it?
Right. So definitely, because we have four flows, we have at least four ways to approach any company situation, and it really depends on what are the pain points of that company in that context in that moment. But if we were to like find the most maybe not the most common, but the flow that is mostly immediately relevant for any company, it's the operational flow. You just look at your inbox, your mailbox. Unless you're one of those superhumans who practice the inbox zero philosophy, I bet that your inbox is a huge pile of things that you still have to go through. So there is this general notion that there is a huge backlog of stuff that we need to do, and you have to decide on what to do and which is more important, which should I do first, which should I postpone, which should I put in the trash bin. So it's a very common experience. We have tons of stuff to do, and what's worse, we are always short of time. We're always running out of time. We are always late, as I was getting into this podcast at the very last moment. So those two elements, the amount of work and the time, are a very common experience. Anyone in the organization at whatever level will can relate to this fact that they have piles of work to do and the time is limited. So operational flow is probably where you would have great odds at succeeding with introducing TameFlow into an organization. But as I said, it really depends on the context and on what the pain points are.
You described the operational flow, and it reminded me of maybe the motivating reason why I even went to seek Agile as a bucket of opportunity to bring to the company and companies I'm at, because it seems the first thing is to tame the chaos. It seems like the operational flow is people feel like, I know the experience, whether it's your individual inbox exploding and your Slack channel, and if you have a project management system, which hopefully companies do, which I've got a little link at the bottom of this video and page for Thing to Reich, which is the system we use and I've developed heavily on, that once you get clarity and visibility on operational flow, then all of a sudden the chaos diminishes and the energy that went into maintaining the frantic starts to moving towards the frontier. And, Andrew is a part of this. He's behind the scenes right now helping us operate the podcast, but he was a part of the RedX Agile transformation that we went through. And from where we were to where we are, I can totally relate to what you're saying is you got to tame the chaos, right? If we even put it into a normal person's day-to-day business, forget about knowledge workers and inboxes. If you've got got to go run groceries and got to go pick this up and, your telephone's ringing and your whole day is just constantly in reactivity mode. I think that might be the signal. Like if you got to get from reactivity to proactivity in order to become high performing. I think even if you look at Maslow's hierarchy of needs, I'm sure we could find a spot in there between self-actualization and highest self, which correct me if I'm wrong, if we look at a high performing team, it's just a group of people who are operating at the higher levels of the hierarchy. You got to maintain the chaos. And the breakdown is, at an individual level, first manage the chaos. At a team level, get a hold of the chaos, get a hold of what's important, prioritize it, and do first things first.
Yeah, I mean, you're highlighting this last sentence of doing first things first. So the ability to focus and the knowledge of what to focus on are extremely important. And one of the, let's say, school of thoughts that I rely a lot on with TameFlow is the so-called theory of constraints or constraints management. It is really, really powerful, and I put it. Sorry?
Eli Goldratt?
Yeah, that's him. So I rely a lot on that sort of thinking, and in fact, my maybe one of the most significant contributions to the field that I have personally developed is how to identify the constraint in a knowledge work setting, especially when you have large organization and where that chaos that you mentioned is like compounded and exponential. You mentioned before, I had that huge case with thousands of people, and they had like a backlog that was growing at the rhythm of 70,000 change requests per month. That is a backlog. Now, how do you gain any control of such a situation? They tried, everything that was known in this world, from Scrum to Kanban and anything in between. But the way that I cracked that nut was really find the constraint. And in this huge organization, 8,000 people, the constraint was one team, 25 people. In a global organization, everything was held back by one single team, but nobody could understand that. Nobody could identify this constraint. And that's the first thing. Now, if you cannot identify the constraint, you cannot possibly act on it. So this question of how do you find the constraint in knowledge work where everything is invisible, and where the sense of overwhelming complexity or even more of complex adaptive systems where nothing can really be nailed down because everything is interacting with everything else, seems like an impossible task. You can't possibly find a constraint therein. But there are ways, systemic ways to do that. Of course, I use a lot of metrics, so at a certain point it becomes important to instrument your way of working so you can collect the right numbers, you must understand the numbers, and then with that understanding, you can zoom into the constraint. And once you find the constraint, okay, there is a lot of rote works that you can do with that, but that is the fundamental first step.
So this fits into the operational flow, right?
Yes, but the constraint now, there is also this widespread belief that a constraint is only a bottleneck in a physical operation. But a constraint is more aptly thought of as anything that holds you back from getting more of what you care about. So for a company, profits. And it can also be material. As a matter of fact, policy constraints, the way we have always done things here, can hold you back in like more than actual chains. The one of the most common and subtle constraints is management attention. The larger the organization, the more the top guys have to juggle and handle, and at a certain point, they just cannot handle everything. So they have to start to delegate, and then you start to having issues of how can I trust the person I'm delegating to? How can I know they will take the right decision? And even worse, because it's knowledge work, they know more than me. So the management attention constraint is key in all this. And with TameFlow, I address that in several ways. For instance, I teach to exercise management by exception. So this is also quite different from what most Agile approaches teach, that you have like cadences that on a regular time basis, you do certain events, meetings. They have many names, but basically people get together and they exchange ideas. They reflect on what they have done. Those cadences are not quite attuned with, number one, the timing of when things happen, and number two, the variation. When Mr. Murphy visits a company and brings chaos at that moment, or not even Mr. Murphy, but even a tiny virus, as we know, can bring chaos to the whole world. When you have a moment of crisis, cadences are just not working. So there must be ways to like drill into the organization the way to communicate and make decision. It's a matter of decision making. And the best thing is that the decision is not taken at the top, but it's decentralized, happens on the spot without any need to consult or to get permission and approval. But this means that the person that is making that decision must also know where the company is heading to. So this notion of the goal, the notion of the leader's intent. Leaders are prone to trust their people if they know that they will make the right decision. And here we get to the heart of TameFlow, because how can a leader trust the decision-making ability of someone who is maybe far away in space and time? We are global. Maybe someone is in Singapore and is far asleep now. And so we need to handle this distance in time and space, and the best way is to make the decision on the spot. So that question, how can a leader trust? Well, this is where the heart of TameFlow comes in, and it's the mental models. The 4 flows are framed in the perspective of certain mental models. A mental model is how you understand the world, and on the basis of your understanding, you will make decisions. Those decisions will prompt your actions, and you will exhibit certain behaviors. So the mental models inside an organization are very diverse, because organizational units are concerned with different aspects of the business. So accounting is one field, software engineering is another one, sales is another one, support is another one. And all of these units have their own mental models. They have their own KPIs. They have their own lingo and jargon. There is nothing like unifying. But the flow perspective can bring this unified way of thinking across the board. So the top person can trust that anyone else, as long as they are equipped with these mental models, will make decisions that are coherent and consistent with what the leader would do in that situation. So we are creating a situation where trust comes out of the adoption of these mental models. And then, of course, the more the leader and the people experience that this is working, that trust will just get reinforced and get stronger and stronger.
You've stepped into a real world situation actually for me right now. And as I help my new company that I've joined here establish leadership, establish mission, establish management, I think to a lot of the conversations I'm having with the leadership and with the teams, I'm kind of an intermediary of sorts in certain days. And what comes up for me is, let's talk to two people right now. Let's talk to the leadership and help them pick what stops the flow of the organization, or help them de-bottleneck, which I know you said that's not the only way to look at it. How would you empower or coach a CEO or an executive suite of people to use the TameFlow mindset essentially to empower their teams? Let's start with that.
Yeah, I love this question because it's one of the greatest challenges that any consultant, or anyone for that matter, who has to contribute in changing and transforming an organization must face. How do you? It's obvious that any transformation will go nowhere unless there is not only the formal approval, but the buy-in and support from the very, very top. So unless you get to that buy-in and support, you'll probably fail. And I think this is one of the big problems of the agile scaling approaches. They want to scale up, yes, but they are sort of not able to reach the very top. And we have this disconnect of language, concepts, behaviors, mental models. So let's start from the top, because that's if we consider like the organization as an the name organization implies it is like an organism. There is something organic. So there is a body, there is a nervous system, and there is a mind, and the ultimate mind is the CEO. So how can we affect the mind of the CEO? Well, we must first of all apply one of the patterns of TameFlow, which is the pattern of enlightened self-interest. What is it that really drives this person in that position, in that context? And CEOs are there to ensure that the company makes more money today and in the future. It's very important to articulate that sentence in that way. It's not just to make more money. That is a recipe for failure. It's make more money today and in the future. In the future, you will bring in a lot of very important element of my 7 Ps, for instance, the planet, or the people, respect for people, respect for the planet, sustainability are there. We want to be there even in the future. So if we start with that premise that a CEO cares about how much money the company is making, one good way to gain the attention of the CEO, remember, management attention is a constraint, is to show that with a different set of mental models, he will be making more money today and in the future. And that is really, I would say, it's the only thing that you need to know in order to start the conversation going with a CEO. Now, here we will find a lot of resistance. Why? Because when you start counting money in a flow perspective, you have to abandon one of the pillars of the modern corporate environment, and that is the pillar of cost-based accounting. Every company is using cost-based accounting, and it is unavoidable. You must do it for legal purposes. You have reporting regulatory requirements, and hey, you must pay taxes, so you must know how much taxes do you need to pay, and that is like the purpose of accounting. But cost-based accounting will make you make the wrong decisions as a leader with respect to that objective of making more money today and in the future. So I present an alternative, which is known as throughput accounting. And in that perspective, you will see that by making different decisions, operational decisions at the top, the company, you will enable the company. So we get to the empowerment part. You will enable the company to be more performing from a financial perspective. So you get the CEO on board with that, and then you figure out how to transform that throughput accounting mental models into equivalent mental models in the operational level. And that's where you start seeing the convergence of the decision making outcomes. If you make a decision at the operational level to increase throughput with respect to the constraint, then the operational throughput, then you will also notice a corresponding increase in the financial throughput. So you have a bottom line impact. This is a really subtle, because you probably have experienced or heard people complaining that they don't understand managers at the top. They take decisions which are totally illogical, that do not make sense. And the explanation is this, that cost-based accounting used for making management decisions is in conflict with the needs of the people on the ground, with the needs of operational flow. So this, it's not only a matter of detachment of not using the same language as we said before, it's really a matter of mental models which are in conflict at the top towards the bottom. So that's like a bit the secret sauce. Address the top, help them to see that there are other ways to look at the world, there are other ways to make these critical decisions, and those ways are of such nature that they can be aligned with everyone else, and you produce this unity of purpose.
That we could go into at a whole new next level, and I had to stop myself from asking a question that would take us deeper into that, because we would push over on time. And I really want us to cover some of the things we promised the people who are here today watching. So are there any teams or circumstances in which TameFlow is not appropriate?
Well, there is absolutely no silver bullet, and not even TameFlow is a silver bullet. And I would elaborate on where we ended with my last reply. If you are unable to get the attention of the ultimate decision maker, the CEO, then I would say don't even try, because you will not be able to make a difference. So that, I think, is the discriminating factor. If you have the attention of the CEO, well, the odds of succeeding with TameFlow are very high. If you don't have it, well, yes, you might experience, for instance, better operational performance. You might have some happier people in some department, but you will not get to the organizational breakthrough in performance that you would get if you had the CEO on board. So I think that's the secret sauce.
You can only really succeed at the highest level of buy-in given the organization's org chart.
Yeah, it's that's where it needs to start. If you don't have that, then it's an uphill battle, and probably you will not even reach the top of the hill.
You'll go in the opposite direction, from trying to become happier and making your teams happier to frustrated and burnt out. We could spend a little time right now just talking about the comparison between TameFlow, Kanban, SCRUM, SCRUMBON. You kind of pick whatever ones come to mind here to compare and contrast. I'll let you just kind of run with that and think about the list of compares and contrasts that you want to do.
Well, I think this also ties into our original tweet exchange of methodologies and frameworks. Now, it's not an easy way, easy task to do a comparative analysis of this whole space. The point from where we could start is what do we have there in the field? So Scrum started off as a process. The first paper of Scrum was called the Scrum process. Eventually, it was like reframed, and it's a play on word, but reframed as a framework. And the idea is that it will give you some fixed points which are expected to always be there, but it's like a scaffold. There are many bits of this jigsaw puzzle which are missing, and that you are supposed to fill in with your own situation and own context, and that makes it very broadly applicable, because we leave these holes open and we fill them in with our context. On the other hand, we have approaches which are more rigorous in prescribing what needs to be done. And if we go back a few years, we had like the rational unified process, which was very prescriptive, and today that has sort of morphed into the scaled agile framework, the SAFe framework, which is not as prescriptive as RUP, but it has a lot of things already like nailed down, and people are expected to do and behave certain things. And then we have Kanban, which is another category which is more evolutionary in its approach, where you start with where you are and you try to discover problems and address those problems one after the other. And eventually, by doing this often enough, you will introduce changes that in the long run will evolve your situation. So you tweeted that, what was it? Methodologies are prescriptives, and frameworks are, what was it? Interpretative, right? And I think that's...
Frameworks are interpretive. Yeah, good memory. They provide principles. Methodologies are prescriptive and provide instructions.
Right. And I think that's quite correct. But we, as I said at the beginning, I didn't agree with your tweet, because I asked you, where do you place TameFlow? And you said, I think it's like a framework, but it's really not.
I'm about to go into a tweet storm, and so instead of writing a bunch of things with someone that I don't know across the world, why don't we meet in person? Thing people should do when they have differences of opinions, and actually meet, talk, and connect, as opposed to using the anonymity of thumb-based communication. So Yeah, my response was, well, let's get more clarity on it. There's a great saying that says, seek to understand, right? Don't seek to be right, seek to understand. I'm sure I'm butchering that quote. I think it's like a Stephen Covey thing.
Yeah.
So I don't know, and I didn't know enough, honestly, about TameFlow to come to any sort of logical conclusion based on just looking at your website between the time you sent a tweet and the time I had to respond. And so I wanted to get more clarity. I have started.
Let me add more confusion then.
Oh, you want to add more confusion?
Because I say I call TameFlow an approach, and it's a funny approach because it does not have any reference processes nor practices like, for instance, lean or extreme programming. It does not have any roles or artifacts or events like Scrum. It does not have principles or values like Agile and the Kanban method. It does not have maturity levels like the CMMI or the Kanban maturity model. And it does not have a reference framework like Scrum and less Scrum at scale and so on. So when I say this, people say, well, it does not have that, not that, not that. Well, what does it have? What is it?
Does it actually exist?
So if we go back to the beginning of our conversation, I was telling you about the patterns approach. So TameFlow is heavily based on patterns. And if I were to extend that tweet where you said the frameworks are interpretative and methodologies are prescriptive, I would add that patterns-based approaches like TameFlow are generative. They generate new situations. So the idea is that when you analyze a company through patterns, you get an understanding, you have a diagnosis. You can then design a new solution, but that solution could be completely new. You have never seen it before anywhere else. So in that sense, you are generating a solution rather than interpreting a framework and implementing it, and rather than following a recipe, a cookie cutter approach like methodologies. So it is sort of a third approach.
A third approach. Okay, so we've got approaches. Frameworks mean that you have principles and scaffoldings, and that's where I was coming from, is essentially a framework gives you the things to kind of build your house around. You can put your own context, you can lay your own foundations, or maybe the foundations are the scaffoldings, and fill it in and build it as you need, right? Kind of, custom built house, you still need kind of some basic materials to come up with the outcome that you wanted. A methodology is more like a track home, right? Kind of like pre-produced, here you go, know what to expect, follow the instructions, step 1, step 2, step 3, to some degree. And then there's kind of this middle ground around an approach. And it's hard to put words around what is an approach.
Another way of framing this is looking at the medical domain. TameFlow is very much, you could define it as praxis. So it's like theory-informed practice. The theory are the mental models. And when you are facing a new situation, you apply like patterns thinking, you identify that context, you identify the problems, you try to figure out what solutions work. So it's you are constructing. Sorry?
I think that might be a better word, practice. If you've got a framework, it helps you build certain things. If you've got a methodology, it's being prescriptive, but practice allows you to. I thought about a yoga practice, and you follow.
Sorry, but I'm maybe I didn't pronounce properly, but I meant praxis, not practice.
Practice. Yeah. Oh, praxis. Practice.
Yes, praxis. It's a different thing from practice. I think it captures pretty much what TameFlow is, because it's based on these mental models. So it's the theoretical part, and then you go into the action. You put these models into action, like a doctor, refers to his memory and recognizes symptoms. Okay, now we try this medicine and let's see if it works. And if he's a good doctor, that action will work. Sometimes even good doctors are not able to resolve the situation because there is maybe some new element which was not there in their experience. So that's where the theory-informed practice becomes praxis, because the new discovery, the things that you discover, are extending your mental models. You're enriching the mental models with these new experiences. And that's pretty much how TameFlow has evolved during these years. It's been facing many problems and describing these situations with a pattern language, and updating and evolving the pattern language as I progressed through my experience.
I know we may not come to an agreement on this, and that's okay. But you've informed me to a new level of understanding, and possibly a category that I had not yet considered, or which is the concept of a pattern. It's a pattern recognition approach. Maybe I said the word approach, but it's at the heart of it, it seems like it's pattern recognition. The same way AI, which is maybe why you're so involved in blockchain, and the mindset between the two is similar, and the construct, which is it's kind of an algorithm for programming your mind to interpret problems. And I think you and I wrote this down, and you're like, oh, we should write this down. I did write it down from our last conversation.
Okay.
And I'm like, so it sounds like it's a pattern recognition and I can't read my handwriting, approach, a pattern recognition and an approach process, something like that. I'm a little fuzzy there, but pattern recognition and adaptation approach. There we go. Pattern recognition and adaptation approach.
Yeah, that sounds quite reasonable, actually. The pattern recognition is definitely there. The adaptation is intrinsic in that feedback loop, where the experience in like shapes the mental models, and then the mental models inform the action. So it's a living body of knowledge that is constantly updated with new experimental and experiential events.
Okay, well, I don't know if we have a category to put TameFlow in still, that the debate still rages on across the world. People aren't on one side or the other, but I might consider to think about it. I think mental model. I think it is if we had to put like one, like it's two words, but what about thinking about it as a mental model? Does that take away from, if someone had to explain, well, what is TameFlow? It's a mental model. Well, what's a mental model? What does it do?
Actually, it's close, but I would care then to clarify that it's a collection of mental models. The mental models are your shortcut to interpret reality. You've probably seen many of the like optical illusions where you look at a drawing and it looks like a cube, but you can't really figure out which is the front side and which is the back side, and many other more sophisticated optical illusions. The reason why the optical illusion works is basically that you are taking a shortcut. You rely on a mental model. You have an expectation that reality looks in a certain way, and that gives you that interpretation. So mental models are great because they allow you to quickly move through reality without overloading the brain capacity. and you make decisions very quickly because you have mental models. Of course, in the example of the optical illusion, mental models are also tricky because they might trick you in certain situations. So that's also another thing to keep in mind. All models, even mental models, they are only an approximation of reality. They are not a perfect representation. What matters is that they allow you to make the right decision in the right context, or most of the times. If you get the odds to your favor, you will be a winner.
I think you did a fantastic job of answering the last question. Why should anybody care about any of this? Right? And that if people are operating in their lives or in their business without some sort of framework, without sort of some mental model, without some sort of method at whatever levels, heuristic was a word that came to mind for me as you were describing the last part of this. If it's in the individual or the team or the organization doesn't have something they can point to as in a way of getting more of what they want, which I loved how you said that at the beginning. A constraint is anything that stops you from getting what you want. Look inside your organization, look inside yourself, look inside of TameFlow, look inside of all the other ways to achieve your results. Because what we've seen, what Steve has seen, is that the secret to high performance individuals, the secret to high performance teams and organizations comes, like you were saying, to purpose, but then the process to help turn that purpose into products and results. And so I think you've done a great job today, Steve, on bringing me up to a new level of understanding around what these definitions mean, what TameFlow can offer. And so if there's anything you'd like to add to that, or let people know where to find your books, what books maybe to choose to start with to help them if they're interested or looking inside themselves or their businesses, I want to take a new next level look at how to improve my performance or team performance, where would you direct them?
Well, the latest book, I think, is the most complete introduction to TameFlow. It is, remember the question you asked me, which flow should you start with? And I said probably the operational flow. In fact, the book is mostly focusing on operational flow, though there are elements of the other three flows as well. Precisely for that reason that I mentioned before, that you are probably overloaded. And in the book, I say it's particularly apt for what I call the pest environment, where you have multiple projects or products, where you have multiple events or deadlines, you have multiple stakeholders and multiple teams. So when you feel that the chaos is completely out of hand, then the things I write in the book might help you. And you find all information about TameFlow on TameFlow.com. I also have a community, so if you want to ask other people who are like TameFlow users or practitioners, you will find it at community.tameflow.com. And you can follow me on Twitter. I am at Tendon, and you'll find me also on LinkedIn. Of course, I'm open to continue this conversation with anyone who would like to know more about TameFlow.
And as my level of sophistication and understanding grows with TameFlow, I look forward to asking you questions. And instead of just hoarding those wonderful answers to myself, would love to bring you back here and do another show and tell on this. And with that said, I have one final thing to say. As I thought about your name, Steve, and I was like, Steve Tendon. I thought how interesting the universe worked itself out again in giving you that last name as somebody like a tendon who connects all the pieces and things together. And so I just thought that's kind of a cool little. Everybody think about that? It's your last name, Tendon, and you connect all.
I typically say I'm broken like Achilles tendon, right?
Yeah. Well, no,
That's the history of Achilles is always interesting, because you have this notion of someone who is hyper performing. Achilles was a hero. He could win any fight and battle, but there was that tendon, which was the weak spot, the weakest link, the constraint.
it's strange.
So focus on your tendon. That's what you should do.
That's unbelievable. I love it. Well, if you've enjoyed this video, enjoyed this podcast, look forward to more of them. My goal is to help illuminate people who understand leadership, management, the different processes that connect the top to the bottom to the top. I'm a practitioner myself, and so these satisfy my curiosity, and I hope along the way, as you follow more of these along with me, listen to people like Steve, you get as much out of this that I do. And so hit that like, hit that subscribe. And if you're interested in the project management system I've crafted to take my methodology into a actionable operational environment, look below. I put a little affiliate link in there to Reich.com. Go check that out, but use the affiliate link. And if you do buy through that link, I'll do a little session, review some of the workflows and templates and things I've put together and mastered for my teams in my environment. I'll share those with you, as well as some of the training videos. And so that's it for me today. I really appreciate Steve taking the time today. That was a fun little journey down the what do we want this to look like road, and I've come up with a pretty nice, pretty penny here at the end. So Steve, why don't you hang out for a couple of minutes afterwards? We'll sign off. I'll hit the end stream here, and I can wrap up there. And to everybody else, thanks for taking time out of your day. Milton, Daniel, looks like Nisha, and I can't pronounce your name, but sure, I'm sorry, you're from Siri from Rochester. There you go. Thank you so much, everybody, and see y'all next time.